Hey, what's up, YouTube? So today we are working on the 73 Chevy C10, and we are going to replace the brake booster, this little thing right here, because we have an aggressive cam and we don't have a lot of vacuum, so that brake assist is not really helping us out. So we're going to switch over to a Hydroboost setup, which uses the power steering to give us some brake pressure assistance, and this is a unit we picked up. So let's get started, guys. So I did get the Hydroboost unit a while ago, but the same guy that painted my truck, Manny, he did a paint job on this brake booster setup, the Hydroboost setup. So let's go ahead and check it out and see what it looks like. You guys let me know what you think. So I think he did an amazing job. It definitely matches the paint. He even added this little canister here. Well, he painted it to make it look like a canister, like it's got some kind of like hazardous waste. I think it looks pretty cool. Definitely one of a kind. What do you guys think? All right, so let's see what else came in the kit. It did come with the fittings to switch over to 6AN on your power steering box, both metric and standard. It also comes with the end fittings, 9 degrees, and then the fittings to hook it up to your brake pedal. And it also came with the high pressure and the low pressure hoses. Pretty much everything to do the conversion except for the power steering and the brake fluid. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna remove this little access panel here, so we have access to the brake pedal and we can disconnect the brake pedal from the brake booster that we have right now. So don't mind the wiring, guys. This is not me. This is my stereo guy and my alarm guy. Freaking running wires everywhere. But we're gonna go ahead and unhook this and then take out the brake booster from the front. Once you unhook your brake pedal from your brake booster, the brake lights will stay on because the switch will close. So you wanna make sure you unplug the brake lights just so you don't drain your battery. So now we're gonna use our vacuum brake bleeder to suck out all the brake fluid from the master cylinder, and then we're gonna pull it off. So I'd recommend putting some rags under the master cylinder so that way any brake fluid that's in there that leaks out, it doesn't get all over your paint. And then use a flare wrench. We're going to use a 9/16 flare wrench for the front and the back. I'm going to pull these hoses off real quick. With the hoses off, we take off both of these nuts, one on each side. They're both 9/16 in size, so we're going to use a wrench for that. And if you guys like this kind of content, do me a huge favor, guys. Make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button. It definitely helps the channel, and I try to make videos like this every week. Next up, we're going to remove the vacuum hose. You guys make sure you plug up the vacuum port so you don't have a huge vacuum leak after you take off your master. And then we're going to take off the 2 bolts that connect the brake booster to the bracket on one side and 2 bolts on the other side. I'm using a 15mm wrench for my nuts, but your nuts might be bigger or smaller, so make sure you check what size they are so you don't strip out your nuts. Once you pull off the vacuum brake booster, you notice there's 6 nuts that hold on the vacuum brake booster bracket to the firewall. So one thing I'm looking at is the distance between these bolts here and those bolts here, and it looks like this, you saw how I bolted up to the bracket, that looks like it bolts up to these bolts back here, so we will not need the bracket. So we're going to go ahead and pull the bracket off and then bolt it straight to that. So now I'm putting the bracket back on the vacuum brake booster so I can measure the distance from the end of the bracket to the center of the hole. And then we're going to adjust our new Hydroboost rod to match that same length. This way, when we mount it up to the firewall, we shouldn't have to make too many adjustments. So I know there's going to be a lot of old timers that say you must bench bleed a new master cylinder, but I'm going to show you guys a shortcut on how to bleed all the air out without having to bench bleed it. So the first step is we're going to mount it to the firewall using the bottom 4 holes that the bracket was attached to. You want to make sure that the part that attaches to the brake pedal is on the correct side of the brake pedal, because if it's on the incorrect side, that's going to be hard to switch it over. You have to basically take off the master cylinder and then put it back in. So for our nuts, we had to use an open-end wrench. We couldn't get a ratchet in there just because there wasn't enough clearance between the nut and the Hydroboost cylinder. So we had to use an open wrench. So once it's mounted to the firewall, next we're going to hook up our brake lines that go to the master cylinder. And these, you don't have to tighten them up super tight right now. Just get them started like hand tight, and then kind of snug them up at the end, but not super tight, because we're going to loosen these up to bleed the brakes. So now that we have the master cylinder and the Hydroboost bolted up to the firewall, we're going to go ahead and hook up the rod that goes to the pedal on the inside, just to make sure that we have the right length and the right clearance. So the brake pedal is now hooked up, and because I measured out the length of the original one, I made the new one match it. The only thing I had to adjust really is just the brake switch just a little bit, so that way it opens when you brake pedal is up, and it closes when you push the brakes. So that's it. So now next, we're gonna start routing the hoses. So on the hoses, you have 2 pressure fittings on this side, and then you have one on this side, and then this is your return. So the way it works on this system, I'm pretty sure it's every system, wherever the accumulator is at, this piece right here, because some of them are inverted, wherever this is at, that fitting there is going to be your pressure coming from your power steering pump. So we are going to run the hose. This here is my pressure hose. We're going to run that from there straight to here. Now on the other side, it's still going to be high pressure, guys. So we still want to run the correct hoses that are for high pressure. This will be coming out, but it'll be coming out high pressure. That will be coming to your rack, or I'm sorry, your steering box right here. This is your high pressure side, and then the return side will still go to your return. However, because our pump only has one inlet for the return, we are going to tee it off. So this hose will come out. Sorry, this hose will come out. It'll tee off to this return hose here. So this return hose is going to come over here, hit the T, and then they're both going to return to the power steering pump. They do make a power steering reservoir like that, or a power steering pump like that has 2 returns. I don't know the part number. If you know the part number, in the comment it in the comments down below. But let's go ahead and go do these hoses now. So first, I'm gonna remove the pressure side power steering hose and take that off. Now you might want to put a drip pan underneath here in case you have a lot of fluid and it leaks out. The hoses that came with our kit are high pressure hoses, and they're rated for around 4,000 PSI. If you don't get the hoses with the kit, you could also use PTFE hoses, and that's what I was using before. That's these hoses right here. And now we're gonna remove that same high pressure power steering hose at the steering box. All right, so I recommend one of 2 things, guys, so you don't get confused. Either do one side at a time, like the pressure side, so you don't get confused with those 2 fittings, or mark those. Mark which one's your pressure side and which one is your return side on your steering box, so that way you don't get confused, and swap those around, because then you're gonna have all kinds of steering issues. So like I mentioned before, our kit came with the hoses. So you have this one, which is a high pressure side, this one, which is a low pressure side. If you didn't get the kit, you could always use PTFE hoses for the higher pressure side, and the same hoses for the return, or you could use regular rubber steel braided hoses for the return side, because it's low pressure. So as you can tell, these are PTFE because of the flare on the end right there, and I had no issues with leaks. So these do work, guys. Don't be scared to use them. So we're gonna go ahead and install this one, measure it out to the Hydroboost, and then cut it out. In the kit, you do get 2 pressure hoses. These do not pivot, so make sure when you run them how you want them clocked. And then we're gonna go ahead and put one of them on. They're both same length, so we're gonna go ahead and use one hose and put it on the back of the power steering pump, and then run the other end to the pressure side, which is right there of the reservoir. And then we're gonna measure it out, cut it, and then attach it the other end of the fitting. So all the fittings that came with this kit are all steel fittings, so you don't have to use an aluminum Allen wrench like I'm using, but you still can. The aluminum Allen wrenches are really good for the aluminum fittings that you can get online from all these other retailers. The aluminum wrenches work better on the aluminum fittings, because that way you don't get scratches and marks on them when you tighten them up. So now we're gonna put the pressure side, I'm gonna attach the fitting there. And then you're gonna wanna cut or measure it out right about there, right before it tapers off. And then make sure you angle your hose where you want it to end up at. So here's our hose coming from the bottom. We'll probably bring it up underneath here. I don't know, what do you guys think? Right there. Well, we can't go out from the outside because this angle here is too steep. So we're gonna go ahead and go from there to there, mark it and cut it. So I put the other hose on just to see how these two would interact with each other as far as routing. So I think I'm gonna go ahead, give it a slight curve here, mark it here, crimp it, and then I'm gonna bring this one underneath it and then route it down to the power steering box. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Mark this right around here. Now, if you're worried about marking it, always give yourself a little bit extra, because you can't add holes, but you could always cut more. So if it's too long, you could always take it apart, cut it. But if it's too short, you're screwed. You gotta get a whole new hose. So that's just a little tip. So the instructions give you a few different options on how to cut it. I'm gonna go ahead and use these cutters that I have that work really well with hoses. I said they work really well with hoses. All right, so now we're gonna attach the fitting to this end right here. Nice clean cut. Take the fitting off and then attach it. All right, so quick tip here. You're gonna index wherever that hose is pointing. You're gonna index it there, because then when you attach it to the hose, you gotta tighten this all the way down. So wherever that index was at, that's where it's gonna end up pointing. So I put my index here, take it apart, put the hose back together. I turn this all the way tight. My index is still pointing that way. So you wanna make sure you tighten this snug, index wherever the line's at, index it on here. So when you take this off, you're gonna put wherever you want that bend to go. So let's say my index was, let's say my index was here, and I want the knife to go there. I'm gonna point that line that way. Then I'm gonna push it into my hose, so I know when I tighten it up, it's gonna be pointing that way. Hopefully that makes sense, guys. All right, so we indexed our fitting. Here is our hose. We're gonna take off the painter's tape that I use. Probably be easier if I had gloves on. But I'm gonna take off the painter's tape that I use to cut the, or to mark the, let me take off my gloves. All right. So we're gonna take off the painter's tape that I use to keep everything from coming apart after I cut it. I like painter's tape because if you put duct tape or anything else, when you pull it off, it puts all this braiding and rips it out, and it makes it like all wide. All right, so there's our mark right there. You can see it. We want it pointing that way. We're gonna put our hose there. I'm gonna put our fitting so it points up. Push it on. Once we get it on here, you're supposed to take it over to the vise and then clamp this down, tighten this up, but we're gonna do it all here. It's no big deal. So we got it all the way in. Just a few more tips. The inside is actually threaded, but it's reverse threaded. So if you use a 13/16 inch socket, you put it on here and you twist it and you push it in, twist it, push in, twist it. You keep doing that, it'll screw into the hose, and then just make sure you have your line marked to wherever you want it to point. Make sure that's snug, almost bottomed out, and then put your top part on. I'm gonna go ahead and use silicone spray to get it in there easier, and that way it screws all the way in without an issue. The bottom, like I said, is 13/16, and because this wrench is big enough, it'll go through the entire fitting. You go ahead and use that to hold it there, and then put a little bit of silicone spray in there. The top part is 1/2 inch. I'm gonna start screwing that in. So you cannot use the close end for the top, just because it won't come out of here. But we can do this all the way until it's snug. So now I'm gonna be quiet, just so I can fast forward this part. There it is. You can see it's indexed. There's a line. We are straight with it. I might go just a little bit harder just to make sure it's snug in. That's tight. That's tight. Let's go see if we got this pretty much straight in. Boom, look at that. It's almost like I'm on professional. Oh, come on. All right, now we're gonna do the same thing to the other side. All right, so now I'm doing the other side. It's still a high pressure, so we have to index the fitting. After you tap the fitting, you know where it's gonna stop at, so you index that so you know where the bend's gonna be at. We're gonna put that on the steering box. Then we're gonna measure out the hose that's attached to the brake booster, the Hydroboost. We're gonna measure the length out, mark it, cut it, and then make sure that the index part is facing towards where we want the bend to be at. When you install the fitting onto the hose, you're gonna rotate it counterclockwise as you push down using the 13/16 socket. The inside of that fitting is threaded, so as you rotate it counterclockwise, it should screw into the hose. Then when you install the threaded part of the A inside, you're gonna screw it all the way in. Make sure that you stop once it's snug, and then once you have the bend part aligned to where you indexed it on the fitting that attaches to the hose. So last, we're gonna run the return hose from there out to about here, and then tee it off from that return. That's gonna come up here, tee it off, and that goes back to the power steering pump reservoir. So next, we're gonna install the rubber hose for the return line. Now it does come with everything included. We're not gonna use these worm style clamps. I like to use the heat shrink ones because they look cleaner. We are gonna use this. I was debating on whether I should cut the hose, splice into it, or convert everything to AN. But honestly, I think this is gonna be the best option to try to make it look clean without spending a ton of money. So let's see how it looks. All right, so here's the return line right here, the rubber one. You can see it's gonna run next to the pressure side that goes over to the steering box. So we're gonna go ahead and measure it out, run it next to it. Make sure it's the same length, approximately. Give the same curvature. And I'm gonna set it right about there. I'm gonna cut it right about there. Now that is gonna be long because once we put this hose in here, we are gonna have to also think about the T-fitting, which, if I can find it, oh, here it is. The T-fitting will be somewhere in here. We'll have to go to there. So that's gonna be our only thing to try to make this look clean. Where should we? I'm assuming we should put it here, so it'll come this way, and then there. I was thinking about going underneath it, putting it down here, so the hose will come here, but that's gonna be a weird curve. Yeah, I think we're gonna go with it pointing up. It's gonna look ugly. It's gonna look like this. Maybe like that. Okay, let's go with right here. So we'll put it right here. Put it here. Go that way. Maybe there. So this will go in here. And trying to follow that curve. You're gonna end up taking a little bit off right here. So like right here. So I think this is what we're gonna have right here. And that. Let's go ahead and put the heat shrinks on all the fittings. Then we're gonna take this one off. I'll put a hose here, measure it out, cut it, and then shrink it up there. All right, so the hose is put together. We're gonna go ahead and put it back on, and then we're gonna measure this part out and then cut it, and then put the heat shrink clamp on it, and we should be good to go. All right, guys, so the hose are ran. You can see this bottom one here is the return. And then we got the pressure side on here that's going to the rack. And we got the pressure side on this side that's coming from the power steering pump. We got our return right there. to the reservoir and the power steering pump. So next up, we're gonna bleed it. So I did not bench bleed it. What we're gonna do is, because from here down, we know there was no air in the system, but if there was air in these lines, it will come over to the top. So right now, right here is where we're gonna have air. So I'm gonna pop this off. I'm gonna fill it up with brake fluid. I'm gonna crack these open, let the air get out. Then I'm gonna tighten it back up. Then I'm gonna have someone push the brakes, crack one open, let that air out, and then crack it back close. Now the secret to this, to bleeding the master cylinder on here, is that you want your pistons are down here, right? Your pistons are down here. So you don't want to get any air pockets in the top of the piston. So if your piston is slanted, you risk the chance of getting an air pocket up here. So we're gonna jack up the back to make it level, so that way there's no air pockets. All the air is gonna escape into the reservoir for the master cylinder. You can see right here the air started to come out. We don't even press the brakes. So once it starts dripping out, that means most of the air already got out. See, it's dripping right there. That's good. This is still not dripping. All right, slowly push it down. When you get to the bottom, tell me. Let me know when you're at the bottom. All right, guys, we just bled it like I told you we were, but I ran out of freaking memory. So this is it right here. The installation is finished. We're gonna finish checking for bubbles, check for leaks, and we're taking it out for a road test, make sure it's good to go. And we should be good. It feels good. The pedal's strong. All right, guys, so I cleared a little bit of room on my phone because I wanted to give you guys the update. So we drove it yesterday. We drove it around. The freaking brakes are amazing. A huge upgrade. Like I said, we have a huge cam on this engine, so when we're getting a lot of vacuum to our brake booster, so that's why the brakes suck. Now, we did think about upgrading the brakes, because most people do that when they have an issue with their brakes. They get bigger pistons, bigger calipers. But you can see here we have the stock freaking brakes in the front, and we got drums in the back. And this thing now stops on a dime and freaking gives you change. So I definitely recommend, if you have some kind of engine where it has a huge cam with low vacuum, instead of upgrading your brakes, I would recommend doing a Hydroboost, just because it gives you that clamping pressure. Now, if for some reason you're doing like a lot of autocross, stuff like that, then you'll definitely might want to upgrade both, because this can only dissipate so much heat. But the reason we're getting better braking now is because our clamping force is a lot stronger with that setup on these stock brakes versus what we had before. Again, guys, if you have questions, definitely ask down below. And as always, follow me on Instagram, guys. I'm more active there. And once I get my YouTube up and going and I get a lot of followers on here, a lot of subscribers, then I'll start posting more on here. So make sure you guys like and share this if you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you on the next one.